right, where we left off, I was more so talking about the 3 missions for the NASA program during the space race. And where we left off, we just finished up the Gemini missions. And if you did not watch part 1 of the video, you need to watch it. This is going to be part 2, moving into the Apollo program. So we're at the Apollo program. I'm going to put this in present mode for this one. So the Apollo missions, this is the last program for NASA during the space race. And this is during the JFK era. As you can see, in 1961, he gave a speech to Congress to expand funding for space exploration. And on September 12th of 1962, he delivered a speech at Rice University about going to the moon, and I'm going to play that.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. We shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
Okay, during that speech, he really gave a goal to get to the moon before the end of the decade. So that would mean before 1970. He's honestly one of the most loved presidents even to this day. It was unfortunate, as we know, because we all are in Texas especially, that he was assassinated in 1963 in Dallas. You can go and visit that area in Dallas, but just kind of letting you know that that was the goal. So moving forward to the next slide, the Apollo missions were from 1963 throughout 1972. The Apollo program was pretty much designed to land humans on the moon and bring them back safely to Earth. There were about 12 missions that were launched in prep of landing on the moon. There were some really highlighted missions that we will talk about. We're not going to talk about all of them, but I will mention a couple right now. So Apollo 7 and 9 were Earth orbiting missions to test command and lunar modules. These two systems were the team that would get to the moon, they were like practicing around Earth. Rather than the moon, they were practicing around Earth, these two modules. And the command module is pretty much like it's like almost like the car of the whole spacecraft, if you will. That would pretty much be the thing that would kind of get them back to Earth. It has all the control panels, everything. Two of the gentlemen on the mission, because usually these missions were about 2 to 3 people, and 2 of the guys for this lunar module, they would detach from the overall spacecraft when they got close to the moon. in the moon's orbit, and they'd go ahead and land that lunar module on the moon, do what they need to do, get back, it would blast off, and get back into orbit to connect back with the overall spacecraft. Just letting you know then that Apollos 8 and 10 were orbiting the moon and testing different, maybe testing the command and lunar modules again, but essentially they were looking at places where these spacecrafts could land, essentially. We know that Apollo 11 was the first mission to land on the moon. And then Apollo 13 was a disaster, a malfunction. And I'm going to kind of show you some video clips with that mission, because there was a really good, one of my favorite movies. And it's kind of cool just to learn about. But anyways, this video here, I'm not going to play this. This will be on the agenda, and you can watch, like, you can go to this slideshow and click on it if you want and kind of watch it if you're really interested in this stuff. But I mean, the Apollo program is a very fascinating program because this is how we beat the Soviet Union to land on the moon. So just to let you know, Apollo 1 is where it all began for the Apollo program now, and it was a huge disaster. It was very upsetting for the United States. So in January of 1967, they were prepping the astronauts, like getting them all set up, and there was something that happened. There was a fire that happened in like the capsule area where these gentlemen were, and they couldn't get out. They couldn't open it up, and they were killed. And the three gentlemen, you can kind of see their names: Ed White, who is part of the Mercury program, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee. These three gentlemen perished in the fire, and I'm going to show you part of the video clip when we get there, and it's kind of it is a very sad time, and that's how this program began. So it already started off on a very somber and sad note. But moving forward, all those other missions happened where they were practicing to essentially land on the moon. And you can see that that happened pretty quick, because on July 16th, 1969, and this is something to really remember, okay, guys? You maybe asked this on a post-pie or something, but just to let you know, there were three astronauts. A lot of us remember Neil Armstrong. He was the commander of the mission. Then you have Michael Collins, and then you have Buzz Aldrin. They launched and got to the moon, and just to let you know, not all three landed and walked on the moon. Michael Collins, he was in the command module part, and he stayed in orbit around the moon because someone has to stay with that overall spacecraft. And in the lunar module were Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, and they got in there and flew down to the surface of the moon. Not everything went perfect at that time, because you have to remember, in 1969, there were a lot of unknowns. I believe to this day it's one of the most watched events around the world. And you can kind of see, they called it the Eagle. That was the lunar module. They called it the Eagle. The Eagles landed on the moon. And you got to remember that with the unknowns of this mission, it was almost like it could have been a suicide mission, meaning no one's ever done this before, into the unknown. These three gentlemen could have never made it back. It's scary, but it's also a very exciting and overwhelming and crazy awesome time for the United States. So these gentlemen got on the moon, and if you ever like look up videos, there were some things that happened. Like the control panel, something broke off, and it was I guess like the two gentlemen, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, fixed it because like they put a pen in there and it fit. So I mean, then the control panel worked again or something like that. But at the time, they didn't know. Like, they practiced this stuff on Earth, landing on the moon, like simulators and stuff. But at the time, they had no idea how they were going to blast off from the moon, if they would be able to, like, because remember, the moon has some gravity. But they didn't know, like, if everything would work. Because they practiced it on Earth, it worked. But who knows if it would work on the moon. So these guys could have been stuck on the moon. essentially, being a suicide mission. But, as the history books went down, everything worked out. They were able to blast off back from the moon and get back into orbit around the moon and connect then with Michael Collins in the command module to get back home and take that voyage back home. So it was a very successful time. Just the most amazing time for the United States. Then we move on to Apollo 13, and again, there's a little video here about showing them landing. I may actually play like a minute or two, maybe like less than that. And the video's super old. You have to remember that they're like, they're in orbit, kind of getting ready to land.
Plus, correction, 00572.
And you kind of hear them speaking, and they're getting closer and closer and closer.
Plus, 00085.
Like, that's crazy to be close to
00764. 030 000. That had taken the light thorough checkout. Houston out. Surgeon, go.
And you can watch this in your own time, but you kind of saw how close they were to the moon and the process of landing, and that's just crazy awesome. All right, now Apollo 13. This mission was pretty much called the successful failure, meaning these gentlemen had a goal of landing on the moon, and they never got to. However, they were able to make it back home without losing their lives in space. We'll put it that way. This is the mission with the famous quote, "Houston, we have a problem." Now, when this mission launched, they were up in space, things going great. Then, all of a sudden, a lot of things went wrong during this mission, meaning they lost their oxygen tanks. So an explosion happened, and pretty early on in the mission, their oxygen tanks went haywire, and they were losing oxygen. And you would know that's a problem because we need that to live. So they lost a lot of their oxygen. With that happening, some of their filters in their spacecraft, the carbon dioxide levels were building up, and they were pretty much starting to inhale carbon dioxide, and that's a big issue. Some other things were happening, like one of the astronauts, Fred Hayes, was having some fever symptoms, like getting sick, maybe flu. Alarms were going off at random times. Cabin temperatures, like inside the spacecraft, were freezing. Like they had to power down everything to save power, even to make it home, because they were losing everything. And if you watch the movie, it's a famous movie. I believe the kids told me in the past, because it's one of my favorites. And it's on Netflix, I do believe, with parental approval. Make sure you get parental approval. I would venture and watch it, but again, with parental approval, you got to check in with them. But everything was going haywire and crazy and bad. So this was a terrible time. People were scared, thought we'd lose our first astronauts in space. And to tell you the truth, if I was alive at that time, I probably would too. This was a bad time. Lots of things were happening. It's kind of like that domino effect. One big thing happens, then everything starts occurring. And it's the same thing here. If you were to watch the movie, you'd see the control panels freezing over everything. They'd turn off power to even make it back home. And they can only power up at certain times. And at times it was like they were flying blind. Like, can you imagine driving a car with like a bandana over your eyes? It was kind of like that in space in a way for them at times. So I'm going to show you some video clips from this mission, from the movie. Not the whole movie, just some video clips, so hopefully you like it. 2 words I wanted to cover with you guys, and you can go back and watch this video if you'd like, but the 2 words are artificial satellites and natural satellites. A satellite is something that orbits around another object. For example, the moon orbits around us, and in turn, we orbit around the sun. Now, the moon and the Earth are natural satellites. They're been there since the beginning, naturally occurring from just events from like the Earth being created, Moon being created, etc. Artificial satellites are man-made, such as the International Spaceship. That's an awesome one. Sputnik 1, when they sent that up into space, the Soviet Union, that's another one. Because they orbit around another object. For example, the International Space Station orbits around us, but it's man-made. So that would be artificial satellite. We already talked about greenhouse effect, but just remember, it's similar to like greenhouse for plants. We can trap the sun's energy and keep it warm on our planet, but we also in turn release enough heat that it can sustain life. With that being said, we're going to go and move into talking about finishing up the space race, okay? I'm going to play you some video clips. I know this is a longer video, but it was very interesting in my opinion. So the next video will be all just clips to enjoy.